In my last video, I discussed some really strong Warcry tech that you can use to gain a huge amount of empowered attacks with only a single use of the skill. But this was hidden away in a 26-minute video, and I realised that many people may not see it. So in this one, I'm going to go over that tech. Now, initially, the issue that I wanted to solve was Infernal Cry empowered attacks on a build with fast attack speed. Usually that means that you consume the empowerments very quickly, and you either need to use the skill very often to keep them up, which would also indicate investment into Warcry cooldown recovery rate, or you pretty much have long periods of downtime where your attacks aren't empowered, in which case you're losing a lot of potential damage output. Usually this isn't a problem because a lot of the more traditional warrior attacks with maces are slower and tend to deal higher damage, so you can get away with lower empowerment count. But if you're playing a build like me with a fast strike skill or two, the empowered attack count disappears very quickly indeed. So for this tech, you're going to either need to have close access to the warrior area of the passive tree, as it requires several notables in that area, or if you're on the opposite side of the passive tree, you can instead make use of a megalomaniac with the correct notables, and this may also require your amulet anoint too. I can recommend the tech if you're on the left side of the tree because you can use your weapon swap points to make it work, and that way you also gain a huge amount of Warcry speed, which makes the setup feel much smoother. But I think this can work as well with the Jewel and the Anoint, especially if you have a good amount of increased skill speed. So first, let's discuss the tech with Infernal Cry, and I'll touch on the other Warcries later in this video. Infernal Cry grants a large amount of extra fire damage for empowered attacks, and it empowers one attack per 10 enemy power in range. Now, enemy power is a mechanic that essentially counts the strength of monsters relative to other monsters. In PoE 2, each monster is assigned a base power number, with very weak monsters having 0.5 power or rarely even less than that, and some of the strongest monsters having 2 or even 3 base power. Then that number is multiplied by the monster's rarity, 1 for normal, 2 for magic, 5 for rare, and then unique boss monsters are always 20 power. This means that for general usage, you can get a lot of empowered attacks if you're surrounded by monsters when you use the skill, but that's not always going to be the case. So ideally, you want to be able to guarantee empowerments, and you can do that with the Roaring Cries passive tree notable. This makes Warcries have a minimum of 10 counted power, and therefore Infernal Cry will always empower at least one attack, even if you use it when there are no enemies nearby. So this is the first notable that you need to have. Then there's another notable which is very close to this one, Vocal Empowerment, which makes Warcries empower an additional attack. The way this node works is that it will simply add an extra empowerment on top. So by combining these two notables together, you now have a minimum of 2 empowered attacks from Infernal Cry when you use the skill, even when using it when there's no enemies nearby. Okay, so next up is a support gem, Echoing Cry. Now this one requires that you move 10 meters before the Warcry can be used, but the upside for doing so is incredible, because your Warcry will echo 2 times after the initial use, and these echoes benefit from both of the aforementioned notables, and more importantly than that, the echoed Warcries do not replace your empowerment count from the Warcry, because they're considered to be part of the same Warcry usage, and so they add on top of the empowerment count. This means that when you use the Warcry, you'll gain a minimum of 2 empowered attacks immediately, then another 2 from each echo, for a total of 6 guaranteed empowered attacks. Notably, there's a modifier on this support gem that halves the amount of total power counted from enemies in range, but this doesn't apply to the minimum power gained from Roaring Cries. The nice thing about this combination is that the required movement of 10 meters is much less of a problem if you have a large amount of empowered attacks, because you're usually moving and attacking anyway, and you're unlikely to run out of empowered attacks before you need to move another 10 meters. So, 6 guaranteed empowerments is pretty good, but we're not done just yet. Next up, there's another passive tree notable, and this one is conveniently right next to Roaring Cries, and it's called Inherited Strength. Warcries have 15% chance to empower 3 additional attacks. This node not only applies to the initial usage of the Warcry, but it also rolls the chance for each echo as well. So if you succeed on one of those 3 rolls, you'll have 9 empowered attacks, for example. Then, lastly, for the core setup, there's the Tireless Support, which grants a 25% chance for an empowered attack to not remove 1 from the counter. So once you have a bunch of empowered attacks, you're then artificially boosting the number of empowerments that you have, as 1 in every 4 of those attacks on average will not spend an empowerment, but will still gain the bonuses as if it did. So with all of these components combined, each of your uses of the Warcry will provide approximately 9 empowered attacks on average, which is really good. But there's some extra stuff you can do here to benefit even more from Warcries. The first is Raging Cry, which provides 4 rage per 5 power counted by the Warcry. This also applies to the Echoes, so each use of the skill will generate a total 24 rage, 8 from the first use, and then another 8 from each Echo. And there's also some bonus tech there with that one, which I'll discuss in a moment when we get to the other Warcries. But first, let's mention a few potential other benefits that you can make use of. Firstly, there's the new Howling Beast notable on the passive tree, which makes Warcries inflict 3 critical weakness on enemies in range. Once again, this also applies to the Echoes, so 9 total critical weakness for a bonus 4.5% base critical hit chance. Lastly, I'll also mention Cremating Cries, which makes each empowered attack gain 15% damage as extra fire, and Thirst of Kitava, granting instant life leech from empowered attacks. Now let's briefly go over the other Warcries. The main mention here is Ferocious Roar, as like with Infernal Cry, this Warcry doesn't require a prerequisite of something like a stunned or frozen monster like some of the other Warcries. This is a bear form Warcry, so you do need to use a talisman in the weapon set using this skill. Ferocious Roar makes empowered attacks break armor, but it also generates a huge amount of rage. With quality, it's 3 rage per power, so with the tech we've already mentioned and combined with Raging Cry support, that's 38 rage per Warcry, and including the 2 Echoes, that's a total 114 rage generated in just a few seconds. However, one of the special things about Ferocious Roar is that you can socket a human Warcry in here, such as Infernal Cry, and when you do that, you'll no longer benefit from Ferocious Roar's Warcry stats. So no rage gain and no armor break, but instead you'll trigger the socketed Warcry and gain the bonuses from that Warcry. And you may be wondering why you would do that and not just use the other Warcry normally, especially considering the massive cost multiplier on Ferocious Roar, which does end up spending a lot of mana. Well, by doing this, Ferocious Roar will add some extra bonuses to the empowered attacks. For example, on this level 17 gem here with 20% quality, each empowered attack deals 108% increased damage. That's a lot, and because of this tech, that's going to be pretty much every attack that you use. So not only are you benefiting from the extra fire damage gained from Infernal Cry, but you also gain the increased damage from Ferocious Roar too. But there's more, because earlier I mentioned that there was some extra tech involving Raging Cry, and it's right here. When you place a Warcry into Ferocious Roar, you technically Warcry twice. Once with the initial use of Ferocious Roar, and again with the triggered Warcry that's socketed in the skill. This counts as 2 Warcries for Raging Cry, so instead of 8 rage, you'll gain 16 rage, and with Echoing Cry, you'll gain a total of 48 rage. And notably, this also works for the Howling Beast notable that we mentioned earlier. Each pulse of the Warcry will apply 6 stacks of critical weakness because it's 2 Warcries going off, and with Echoing Cries, that's a total 18 stacks of critical weakness for 9% base critical hit chance. Now, you can also do this tech for other Warcries. It works for Fortifying Cry, for example, and there's also Seismic Cry and Arctic Howl too, but those 2 Warcries require a prerequisite condition of requiring a particular status on monsters in range, such as requiring a heavy stun, but if you use them while the condition is satisfied, you will gain all of the empowerments like a normal Warcry. But that's about it for this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.